Kethforin stood behind the observation glass and watched the shuttle dock. He held a data pad in his long, thin fingers, its screen already open to a blank file. He had been told to observe. He had been told to take notes. He had been told, in the polite but firm language of the Concordance Cultural Bureau, that this assignment was important. He did not feel that it was important. 12 humans, that was all. 12 engineers, medics, and security consultants from a species that had only joined the Concordance of Settled Worlds 8 months ago. They were provisional members, barely past their trial period, and they had been assigned to Thavine Anchorage as part of a standard integration program. Every new species went through it. The Urani had done it. The Vichy had done it. Even the Droon, with all their bulk and noise, had done it. Now it was the humans' turn. Kethforin was Sileni. His people were tall and thin, with skin that glowed faintly blue in low light. Their bones were hollow. Their muscles were built for precision, not power. They had survived not by fighting the dangers of their homeworld, but by seeing them coming and stepping aside. Caution was not just a habit for the Sileni. It was a religion. He watched the shuttle door open. The humans came out laughing. That was the first thing he noticed. They were loud, not in an aggressive way but in a careless way, like people who had never needed to worry about attracting predators. There were 7 men and 5 women, all dressed in simple gray uniforms. They carried their own bags. He noted this because the station had provided grav lifts for their cargo, but most of them had simply thrown duffel bags over their shoulders and walked. One of them, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a short tail, was carrying 2 bags, one on each shoulder. She was talking to the man beside her and did not seem to notice the weight. Kethforin checked her file. Corporal Inez Majuro, engineer, 29 years old, no special physical training beyond the standard requirements of her military. Her homeworld gravity was listed as 9.8 meters per second squared. He paused at that number. The Concordance median for sapient homeworlds was 3.7. He did the math in his head, then did it again because he thought he had made an error. He had not. Humans came from a world with nearly 3 times the average gravity. He typed a note, interesting but likely not significant. The orientation took 2 hours. Kethforin sat in the back of the briefing room and watched the humans listen politely to the station protocols. They nodded at the right moments. They asked reasonable questions. A few of them yawned, which he later learned was a sign of tiredness and not, as he first feared, a threat display of their teeth. They seemed ordinary, friendly even. One of them, a large man named Sergeant Tamaz Reyes, made a joke that Kethforin did not understand, and all the other humans laughed. Even some of the Vichy orientation staff, who could not possibly have understood the joke either, made their clicking sound that passed for amusement. The humans had an easy warmth about them. They smiled constantly. They made eye contact. They seemed eager to be liked. Kethforin wrote, socially adaptable. No signs of aggression, appear to integrate well. After orientation, he followed the group to the cargo bay, where their equipment was being unloaded. This was where the first incident happened. A loading arm was transferring supply containers from the shuttle to the station's storage grid. The containers were standard size, roughly 1 meter square, and each one weighed about 90 kilograms. The loading arm moved them smoothly through the air on magnetic rails, stacking them in neat rows. One of the magnetic clamps failed. A container slipped free and fell. It happened fast. The container dropped from a height of about 2 meters, directly above a cluster of Vichy dock workers. The Vichy were insectoid, about waist height to a human, with delicate exoskeletons that could crack under far less than 90 kilograms of falling metal. Corporal Majuro caught it. She had been standing 3 meters away talking to Reyes about something. She moved without looking, the way a person might catch a cup they had knocked off a table. One hand came up. Her fingers closed around the container's grip bar. Her arm absorbed the impact. She held it there, one-handed at full extension, and did not stop talking. Kethforin replayed the moment in his mind. She had not braced. She had not bent her knees or shifted her weight. She had simply reached out and stopped 90 kilograms of falling metal with one arm as though it were a book sliding off a shelf. The Vichy dock workers had frozen. All 6 of them stood completely still, their antennae pressed flat against their heads, which Kethvorin knew was a fear response. One of them was trembling. Majuro noticed their reaction. She set the container down gently and smiled at them. "Sorry about that," she said. "Guess that clamp needs fixing, huh?" She turned back to Reyes and continued her conversation. Kethvorin stood very still for a long time. Then he walked to his quarters and sat at his desk and tried to write his report. He typed several sentences, deleted them, typed more and deleted those as well. He was not sure what he had seen. Or rather, he was sure what he had seen, but he was not sure what it meant. He pulled up Majuro's file again. Under physical classification it read, Standard, no augmentation, no genetic modification, baseline human. Baseline. He scheduled an interview with her for the following day. When they sat down together in a small meeting room, she was pleasant and open. She answered all his questions about human culture, Earth's geography, and her training background. When he asked about the cargo incident, she tilted her head. "The box, oh yeah," she shrugged. "I just didn't want it to land on anyone's foot." "It weighed 90 kilograms, Kethvorin said. "Did it?" She thought about this for a moment. Didn't feel that heavy. But I guess with the station gravity being lower than what I'm used to, things feel lighter here." She said this as if it explained everything. She did not seem to understand why he was asking. To her, catching a falling object was not an event. It was just a reflex like blinking. That night, Kethvorin submitted his first official report to the Cultural Bureau. He kept it brief and professional. Initial observations suggest that humans are somewhat stronger than the median sapient species. They appear to be unaware of this disparity. I do not consider this finding particularly noteworthy at this time. We'll continue to monitor and report as integration proceeds. He read it over twice before sending it. It sounded calm and measured. It sounded like the assessment of a careful, rational observer who had everything under control. He turned off his data pad and stared at the ceiling of his quarters for a very long time. 90 kilograms, one hand without looking. He did not sleep well that night. 3 months passed, and Kethvorin filled his data pad with notes. The humans settled into station life, the way water fills a container. They spread into every gap, adapted to every surface, and made themselves at home with a speed that unsettled him in ways he could not quite explain. They learned the Vichy clicking language well enough to tell jokes in it. They memorized the names of all 42 species on the station. They decorated their quarters with strange objects from Earth, plants and photographs and colored fabrics, and invited their neighbors to visit. They were, by every social measure, excellent guests. The incidents, however, did not stop. The first one that truly caught the attention of station leadership happened in the recreation hall. Sergeant Tomás Reyes was sitting with a group of off-duty workers from several species, playing a card game the humans had taught them. The mood was light. Drinks were being shared. At some point, the conversation turned to physical contests, and a Droon cargo handler named Gorvash challenged Reyes to an arm wrestling match. This was notable because the Droon were considered among the strongest species in the Concordance. They came from a high-gravity world, not as high as Earth but close, and their bodies were built like stone. Gorvash stood a full head taller than Reyes and outweighed him by at least 50 kilograms. His arms were as thick as Reyes's thighs. A crowd gathered. Bets were placed. Every non-human in the room assumed Gorvash would win easily. Kethvorin, who happened to be passing through, stopped to watch. The two of them clasped hands. Someone counted down, they pushed. It was not instant. Reyes strained. His face turned red. A vein stood out on his neck. But slowly, steadily, his arm forced Gorvash's down to the table. The Droon's eyes went wide. He grunted, pushed back with everything he had, and still his knuckles touched the surface. The room went quiet. Reyes grinned and shook Gorvash's hand. "Good match," he said, breathing hard. "You almost had me, big guy. Seriously, I thought you were going to take it there for a second." Kethforin watched Reyes' face carefully. The human was not being modest as a social strategy. He was not performing humility to soften the blow. He truly believed the match had been close. He had no idea that every alien in the room was staring at him as if he had just bent a steel bar with his bare hands. Gorvash said nothing. He stood up, nodded once, and left the recreation hall. The next morning, he filed a formal reassessment request with station security, asking that human personnel be reclassified from standard integrants to high-threat auxiliaries. The request was denied. The security office said there was no precedent. The second incident was harder to ignore. A malfunction in the station's lower ring sealed a compartment with 3 Sileni researchers trapped inside. The door's magnetic locks had fused during a power surge, and the room's atmosphere was venting slowly through a cracked seal. The researchers had about 30 minutes of breathable air. Station protocol said to wait for a repair drone, which would arrive in 40 minutes. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the human medic, did not wait. She arrived at the sealed door, assessed the situation in about 5 seconds, and grabbed the manual release handle. This handle was designed to be operated by powered tools. It required a sustained force of 3,100 newtons to activate. The station's maintenance manual said this clearly, in bold text, with a warning symbol beside it. Tanaka pulled it with her hands. The mechanism screamed. Metal ground against metal. Tanaka's face twisted with effort and her palms split open against the rough grip, blood smearing across the handle. She did not stop. She pulled until the locks disengaged and the door slid open, and the 3 Sileni researchers stumbled out into clean air, alive and gasping. Tanaka looked at her bleeding hands and frowned. "Stupid design," she muttered. "They really should put a better grip on those." Kethforin reviewed the security footage 11 times. He watched her hands close around the handle. He watched the muscles in her forearms tighten. He watched 3,100 newtons of resistance simply stop being a problem because a human woman decided that a door needed to be open. She had not been angry. She had not summoned some hidden reserve of adrenaline. She had just pulled hard because people were in danger and waiting was not an option she found acceptable. The third incident was the smallest, and in some ways the worst. A human logistics officer was chatting with an Urani diplomat in a corridor. The Urani were soft-bodied beings, about the size of a human child, with smooth skin over a flexible internal cartilage structure. They were known for their intelligence and their physical delicacy. The human said something friendly and gave the Urani a pat on the back. Just a pat. A casual gesture of warmth, the kind humans gave each other 100 times a day without thinking. The Urani stumbled forward 3 steps and hit the far wall. Medical examination revealed a hairline fracture in the diplomat's dorsal plate. The injury would heal in a few weeks, but it required a brace and pain medication. The human who had caused it was devastated. Kethforin found him sitting in the medical bay's waiting area, head in his hands, repeating the same thing over and over. "I barely touched him. I swear I barely touched him." He was telling the truth. Kethforin had seen the footage. The pat was light by human standards. It was the kind of contact that would not have registered between 2 humans. But the Urani was not human, and what counted as a friendly tap to one species counted as a blow to another. That night, Kethforin began a project he had been avoiding. He pulled up the Concordance's comparative physiology database and ran the numbers on humans against every other sapient species on record. The results made him sit very still for a long time. Human bone density placed them in the 96th percentile. Human grip strength was in the 97th. Their endurance, Their ability to simply keep moving when other species would collapse from exhaustion was beyond the chart entirely. They could run for hours without stopping. They could survive impacts that would kill most other sapient beings. They could heal broken bones in weeks, torn muscles in days, and cuts in hours. And they thought they were ordinary. He found a human fitness report in Majuro's file. She had rated herself as moderately fit, could do better. Her physical test scores, when converted to concordant standard metrics, placed her above the combat minimums for 11 different species' elite military forces. She could do better. Kethvorin closed the database. He sat in the blue glow of his own skin and thought about 12 friendly, smiling people who carried their own luggage and told jokes, and caught falling objects without thinking, and had no idea, no concept at all, that they were walking through a station full of creatures they could break with a careless gesture. He opened his report file and changed the classification from cultural observation to strategic assessment. He chose his words carefully. The humans are not hiding their strength. That is what concerns me. They simply do not know. He sent the report and turned off his pad. Somewhere on the station, he could hear humans laughing. The sound carried through the walls, warm and easy, and completely unaware of how far it traveled in the silence. The concordance held a diplomatic reception every quarter cycle, and this one carried more weight than most. The territorial dispute between the hegemony of Reth and the Corvalli freeholds had been growing worse for months. Border skirmishes had turned into blockades. Trade routes were closing. Words like intervention and fleet deployment were being spoken aloud for the first time in decades, and the representatives who gathered in the grand hall of Thavine Anchorage that evening moved through the crowd with the careful steps of people walking across thin ice. Kethvorin moved among them and tried to listen, but his eyes kept drifting to the humans. They had been invited as a courtesy, nothing more. Provisional members had no vote in concordance policy, no authority in military matters, and no real reason to be there except that excluding them would have been rude. There were 4 of them at the reception: Corporal Majuro, Sergeant Reyes, Dr. Tanaka, and a quiet communications officer named Specialist Ade Okonkwo, who spent most of the evening standing near a window, watching the stars. Kethvorin had shared his strategic assessment with a handful of trusted colleagues in the weeks since he had filed it. The reactions had varied. 2 Sileni academics told him he was overreacting. A Vichy security analyst read the report 3 times and then asked him, in a very small voice, to never mention it again. A Droon military historian said simply, "Yes, we know. We have always known." But it was Commander Threnes of the Corvalli freeholds who sought him out at the reception, and her reaction was the one that stayed with him. She was tall for a Corvalli, which meant she stood about level with Kethvorin's chest. Her people were covered in fine gray scales, and their eyes were large and dark and saw in spectrums that most species could not. She was a career military officer, and she did not waste time on pleasantries. "I read your report," she said, standing beside him near the drink table. "The one about the humans. It was classified. It was classified poorly." She picked up a glass of something amber and held it without drinking. "Tell me honestly, if the humans decided to fight, not these 12 but their entire species, if they decided to take something by force, what would stop them?" Kethvorin opened his mouth and found that he did not have an answer. Threnes nodded as if he had said something profound. "That is what I thought." She looked across the room at Reyes, who was showing a group of Urani children a trick with a small coin, making it disappear and reappear behind their ears. They were shrieking with delight. "They are kind," Threnes said. "That is what makes it worse. Kind things that do not know they are dangerous have no reason to be careful." She walked away, and Kethvorin stood alone with a feeling in his chest that he was beginning to recognize as dread. Later that evening, he found Dr. Tanaka sitting by herself in a quiet corner of the hall. Her shoulder had healed fully from where she had pulled it while forcing the pressure door. though she still rolled it occasionally as if testing the joint. She smiled when she saw him and waved him over. He sat down across from her and decided to be direct. "Dr. Tanaka, I have a question that may seem strange." "I like strange questions." "Among your own kind, what do you consider strong?" She thought about it. Like physically strong, I guess people who really train for it, Olympic weightlifters, those guys who do strongman competitions, pulling trucks and flipping tires, special forces soldiers who train for years and run 50 kilometers with full packs. She took a sip of her drink. "Why?" Kethforin's mouth felt dry. "The humans on the station, you, Corporal Majuro, Sergeant Reyes, how would you classify yourselves on that scale?" "Oh, we're nothing special," Tanaka said, laughing. "I mean, I go for a jog a few times a week and I think Reyes does some weightlifting, but we're pretty average, normal people." Normal people. Kethforin's data pad, sitting in his pocket, contained files showing that Tanaka's resting grip strength exceeded the maximum combat rating for Silani Special Forces. She jogged a few times a week. She was nothing special. He pressed further, keeping his voice calm. "You mentioned soldiers who train for years. What are they capable of?" Tanaka leaned back and thought. "Well, there are records of endurance runners covering over 200 kilometers in a single stretch. Some special forces guys can carry twice their body weight through rough terrain for hours. There is this thing called pursuit predation. Before we had weapons, our ancestors used to hunt by just chasing animals until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. We couldn't outrun them in a sprint, but we could keep going longer. Just follow them, walking, jogging for hours and hours until they dropped." She said this casually, the way someone might mention an interesting fact they had read in a book. "There was this case," she continued, warming to the subject, "where a woman lifted a car off her child. The car weighed over 1,000 kilograms. Adrenaline, they said. The body can do incredible things when someone you love is in danger." She paused and smiled. "And there are people who have survived falling from airplanes without parachutes, terminal velocity straight into the ground, broken bones everywhere, but they lived." Kethforin felt the dread in his chest solidify into something cold and heavy. "These are outliers," Tanaka added quickly, seeing something in his expression. "Crazy stories, 1 in a million stuff. Most of us are just regular people. Regular people who chased animals to death. Regular people whose bodies could, under stress, lift objects 20 times their own weight. Regular people who survived impacts that would reduce a Silani to fragments." He thanked her and excused himself. He needed air or whatever passed for it on a space station. Across the hall, Majuro was telling a story to a small group of aliens. She was animated, using her hands, laughing. Kethforin was too far away to hear the details, but he caught fragments. Something about a camping trip when she was young. Something about being chased. He saw the Vichy diplomat beside her discreetly look down at his personal device. The diplomat typed something, read the result, and very slowly put the device away. Then he looked at Majuro with an expression that Kethforin recognized immediately because he wore it himself every day now. It was the expression of someone who had just learned something they could not unlearn. The Vichy excused himself shortly after. Kethforin did not blame him. That night Kethforin could not sleep. He lay on his back in his quarters, the blue glow of his skin reflected in the ceiling above him, and he thought about the word average. Inez Majuro was average. She said so herself. She caught 90-kilogram containers with one hand by accident. She carried twice the luggage of any other species without noticing. She came from a world where the gravity would crush a Silani skeleton in hours, and she called it home. Tamaz Reyes was average. He beat the strongest drone on the station in a test of strength and genuinely believed the match was close. Yuki Tanaka was average. She ripped open a door built to resist powered tools and complained about the handle design. They were all average, every single one of them. They said so with straight faces and clear eyes, and they meant it completely. And somewhere on Earth, the planet these average people came from, there were the ones who were not average, the ones who trained, the ones who pushed themselves to the limits of what a human body could do, the athletes, the soldiers, the ones Tanaka called special. Kethforin stared at the ceiling and tried very hard not to imagine what those humans were like. He failed. He thought about Commander Threnes' question, what would stop them? And then he thought about the coin trick, and the laughter of Urani children, and the way Majuro always asked if he was eating enough because she said he looked too thin. And he thought that maybe the answer to Threnes' question was not about weapons or defenses or strategic alliances. Maybe the answer was that nothing would stop them. And maybe the only reason anyone was still alive to worry about it was that the humans had never once considered that stopping them was something anyone would need to do. He did not sleep that night either. The alarm started at 3:47 station time. Kethforin was pulled from a thin, restless sleep by the sound, a low, pulsing tone that meant the station was not under attack, but that something aboard it had gone very wrong. He dressed quickly and made his way to the command center, where the situation was already taking shape on the main display. A radical Rithian separatist cell had seized the lower docking ring. The details came in pieces: 14 armed operatives, military-grade kinetic barriers, plasma cutters. They had moved during a shift change, overwhelmed the 2 Vichy guards on duty, and sealed the ring before anyone could respond. Inside the captured section were 217 hostages from 9 different species: merchants, engineers, families who lived on the lower ring, children who had been sleeping in their beds 20 minutes ago. And 4 humans. Kethforin felt the dread he had been carrying for months crystallize into something sharp and immediate. He knew which humans were down there. Majuro, Reis, Tanaka, and Okonkwo had been assigned to a maintenance project in the lower ring's engineering section. They were not soldiers on a mission. They were technicians with tool kits who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the command center, Station Director Peleth, a Vichy of considerable rank and very little patience, was coordinating the response. The station's security force was Vichy, lightly armed, trained for peacekeeping rather than combat. They had surrounded the sealed access points to the lower ring, but the separatists' kinetic barriers made a direct assault impractical. Concordance protocol was clear: negotiate, establish communication, wait for a specialized response team which was 4 days away on the nearest military vessel. 4 days. Inside the lower docking ring, the situation was controlled but tense. The Rithian separatists were professionals. They had planned this carefully, and their leader, a scarred operative who called himself Vask, kept his people disciplined. The hostages were gathered in the main cargo atrium, seated on the floor in rows, guarded by 6 armed Rithians while the rest secured the perimeter. Rithians were a reptilian species, strong by galactic standards, covered in thick, dark scales that served as natural armor. They came from a mid-gravity world and considered themselves formidable. Vask had assessed the hostage population with a soldier's eye and categorized them by threat level. The Urani were harmless, the Sileni were fragile, the Vichy were timid, and the 4 humans were, in his estimation, soft-skinned bipeds with no claws, no armor, and no visible weapons. Minimal threat. Corporal Inez Majuro sat on the floor with her back against a cargo container and her eyes half closed. She looked calm. To anyone who did not know humans, she looked resigned, perhaps even sleepy. Reis sat beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. Tanaka was near the front of the group, close to a cluster of Sileni families with young children. Okonkwo was further back, watching the guards with quiet, steady attention. They had not spoken to each other since the capture. They had not needed to. Hours passed. Negotiations began over the station's communication system. Vask demanded recognition of the Rithian separatist state, the release of political prisoners, and safe passage out of concordant space. Director Peleth listened and responded with practiced diplomatic patience. Kethforin stood in the command center and watched the security feeds and felt completely useless. On the feeds he could see the hostages. Most of them were frightened. The Urani children were crying softly. The Sileni sat rigid, their bioluminescence dimmed to almost nothing, which meant they were terrified. The humans sat still and watched. Then at hour 6 something changed. One of the Rithian guards was escorting a group of hostages to a water station. An elderly Urani, slow and unsteady, did not move fast enough. The guard struck him across the back with the stock of his weapon. The old man fell. He did not get up. Across the atrium, Majuro's eyes opened fully. Kethforin saw it on the security feed. He had spent months watching humans, studying their faces, learning to read their expressions. He had seen them happy, confused, embarrassed, and tired. He had never seen what he saw now. It was not rage. Rage was hot and loud and obvious. This was something else. Majuro's face went still, completely, perfectly still. Her eyes locked onto the guard who had struck the old man, and something behind them changed in a way that Kethforin could feel through the camera. She did not clench her fists. She did not tense her muscles. She simply became very, very quiet. Reyes saw it. Tanaka saw it. Okonkwo saw it. They all went still in the same way at the same moment, like a signal had passed between them on a frequency no one else could hear. There were no words, no hand signals, just 4 humans looking at each other across a crowded room and reaching a decision. They waited. At hour 7, a power coupling in the lower ring failed. It was not sabotage. It was a genuine malfunction caused by the Separatists' plasma cutters damaging a conduit during their initial takeover. The lights went out for 4 seconds. 4 seconds of perfect darkness. Kethforin watched what happened next on the infrared security feed, and for the rest of his life, he would remember every frame. Majuro moved first. She covered the distance to the nearest guard in 2 steps, faster than the Rithian could react in the dark, faster than his scaled eyes could adjust. She caught his weapon arm and twisted. The arm broke at the elbow with a sound that the microphones picked up clearly. The guard started to scream, and Majuro took his weapon away and threw it across the room in a single motion. Reyes hit the second guard like a landslide. He did not punch. He did not kick. He simply drove forward with his full body weight and put the Rithian through a partition wall, not against the wall, through it. The wall was a composite panel rated for light structural use, and Reyes went through it with the guard in front of him like it was made of paper. Okonkwo, the quiet communications officer who had spent the reception looking at stars, disabled a third guard with a chokehold so fast and so precise that the Rithian was unconscious before his weapon hit the floor. Tanaka did not fight. Tanaka moved to the Sileni children, put her body between them and the chaos, and stayed there. When a guard near her fired blindly in the dark, the plasma bolt grazed her left shoulder. The flesh burned. She did not move. She did not make a sound. She simply pressed the children lower and covered them more completely. The lights came back on. In the atrium, 6 Rithian guards were down. Majuro and Reyes and Okonkwo stood over them, breathing hard, their eyes still carrying that terrible stillness. The whole thing had taken 90 seconds. The remaining 8 separatists, sealed in other sections of the ring, heard the commotion over their radios and found only silence when they called for their comrades. In the command center, 43 representatives of 30 different species stared at the security feeds. Nobody spoke. Director Peleth's antennae were flat against her skull. A Droon military observer had his mouth open. Kethforin realized that his own hands were shaking. Then the feeds showed what happened next, and that was the part Kethforin would remember even longer than the violence. Majuro knelt beside the guard whose arm she had broken. She spoke to him softly. She stabilized his arm with a strip of fabric torn from her own uniform. Reyes pulled the guard he had tackled out of the rubble of the wall. The Rithian was dazed and bleeding from a gash on his head. Reyes sat him down against a support column, checked his pupils, and told him to stay still. Tanaka, her shoulder still smoking from the plasma burn, moved to the elderly Urani who had been struck and began treating him. When she finished, she turned to the injured Rithians and treated them too, with the same careful hands and the same steady voice. Okonkwo found a communications panel and called the command center. His voice was flat and even. Lower docking ring atrium is secure. 6 hostiles neutralized. We have wounded on both sides, requesting medical teams. He said it the way someone might report a plumbing issue. Matter of fact, routine. Commander Threnny stood at the back of the command center. She had watched everything without moving. Now she spoke, and her voice was very quiet. Those were not soldiers. The one who broke the wall was a logistics sergeant. The one who shielded the children was a medic. The one who broke the guard's arm was an engineer. She paused. What are their soldiers like? The room stayed silent. Nobody had an answer. And Kethforin, watching Majuro carefully bandage the arm of the man she had disabled 60 seconds earlier, realized that nobody wanted one. The council chamber of Thavine Anchorage was built to hold representatives from all 42 member species of the Concordance of Settled Worlds. It was a vast, curved room with tiered seating that rose in a half-circle around a central platform. The acoustics were designed so that a whisper from the platform would reach every seat. On most days, the chamber hummed with the noise of dozens of translators working simultaneously, delegates murmuring to aides, the clicking and buzzing and rumbling of a galactic community in conversation. Today it was silent. Kethforin walked to the central platform and felt the silence settle on him like weight. Every seat was filled. Representatives from species he had never seen attend a general session were present. The Droon delegation, usually limited to 2, had sent 7. The Corvalli had their full military advisory staff in the gallery. Even the reclusive Thon, who had not attended a session in 4 years, had sent an observer. They were all here because of the footage. The 90 seconds of infrared security recording that had been transmitted to every Concordance member world within hours of the crisis. 4 unarmed humans, 11 armed Rithians, a dark room, and then it was over. Kethforin set his data pad on the podium and looked out at the faces staring back at him. He saw fear in most of them. He had expected that. What he had not expected was the anger. Several delegations had already submitted motions to restrict human access to Concordance space. The Pelori wanted humans banned from the station entirely. The Vichy Security Directorate had drafted a proposal to classify all humans as military assets, subject to weapons-grade containment protocols. They wanted to cage them, because they were afraid, and Kethforin understood the fear because he had felt it himself, lying awake in his quarters, staring at his ceiling, thinking about 90 kilograms in one hand and the word average. But he had also seen other things, and he had come here to talk about those. Honored representatives, he began, and his voice carried through the silent chamber. I have spent 4 months living alongside the human auxiliary personnel assigned to this station. I have observed them in their daily routines, their social interactions, their moments of crisis and calm. I have studied their physiology, their history, and their psychology, and I have been asked to present my assessment of the threat they represent. He let the word threat hang in the air. I will not insult your intelligence by pretending the data is ambiguous. It is not. He touched his pad, and the chamber's display screens lit up with comparative charts: bone density, muscle fiber composition, cardiovascular endurance, pain tolerance, healing rate. In category after category, the human indicators sat at the far edge of the scale, isolated from the cluster of other species like a star that had drifted away from its constellation. Humans are, by nearly every physical measure, among the most formidable sapient beings in known space. Their homeworld gravity is nearly 3 times our median. Their bodies are built to survive conditions that would kill most of us in hours. They can sustain physical damage that would be fatal to a Silani, an Urani, or a Vichy, and recover from it in weeks. They can maintain intense physical effort for periods that exceed the endurance of species twice their size. He paused. The chamber was completely still. And they do not know this. He changed the display. Now it showed excerpts from his interviews with the human personnel. Majuro saying the cargo container didn't feel that heavy. Reyes saying the arm wrestling match was close. Tanaka rating herself as moderately fit. Okonkwo, when asked about his combat training, saying he had taken a self-defense class once in college. These are not lies, Kethforan said. These are not acts of deception or false modesty. These humans genuinely believe they are ordinary. They have no frame of reference for their own capabilities because they have never measured themselves against other species. On their world, surrounded by others of their kind, they are average. They are normal. They are, in their own words, nothing special. He took a breath. Several delegations have proposed restricting human access to concordant space. I understand the impulse. I shared it for a time, but I have come to believe it is the wrong response, and I want to explain why. He changed the display again. Now it showed the security footage from the hostage crisis, but not the 90 seconds of violence. It showed what came after. Majuro kneeling beside the guard she had disabled, wrapping his broken arm with strips of her own clothing. Her hands steady, her voice soft. Reyes, pulling a dazed and bleeding Rithian from the rubble of a wall, and checking him for injuries with the careful attention of someone handling something precious. Tanaka, her shoulder burned raw by plasma fire, treating the elderly Urani first, and then turning to the Rithian wounded with the same gentleness, the same care, the same refusal to distinguish between ally and enemy when someone was hurt. Okonkwo, standing guard over the entire group with a weapon he had taken from a fallen operative, pointed at the floor, watching for danger with quiet vigilance so that the others could focus on healing. 90 seconds, Kethforan said. That is how long it took 4 average humans, unarmed, untrained for combat, to disable 11 armed and armored Rithian operatives. I will not diminish this. It is a staggering demonstration of physical capability, and every person in this chamber is right to take it seriously. He let that sit. But I ask you to take the next part seriously as well, because in the minutes that followed, those same 4 humans did something that I believe is far more important than anything they did in the dark. They helped. They did not celebrate. They did not posture or claim victory. They did not turn their strength against the helpless. They immediately, instinctively, without hesitation or discussion, began caring for the wounded, all of the wounded, including the people who had held them captive, including the guard who had struck an old man and triggered the entire confrontation. He looked around the chamber. I have studied 42 species. I have read the military histories of civilizations that span millennia. I have seen strength used to conquer, to dominate, to destroy, and to terrorize. What I saw in that cargo atrium was something different. I saw strength that did not know itself, wielded by people who did not think of themselves as dangerous, directed entirely toward the protection of others and followed immediately by compassion. He straightened. The question before this council is not whether humans are dangerous. They are. The question is what kind of dangerous they are. And I believe, based on everything I have observed, that the answer is this. He spoke slowly, choosing every word. They are the kind of dangerous that carries you to safety and then apologizes for gripping too hard. They are the kind of dangerous that rips open a sealed door because someone on the other side needs help. They are the kind of dangerous that catches a falling object before it hurts someone and then forgets about it by dinner. They are the kind of dangerous that breaks your arm in a fight and then sets the bone afterward. He paused one final time. I do not recommend restrictions. I recommend trust, not because the humans are safe. They are not safe. Nothing that powerful is safe. But because in 4 months of living beside them, I have seen no evidence that their strength is anything other than an accident of evolution that they have never once chosen to use for cruelty. They are gentle not because they are weak, but because they assume everyone around them is just as strong as they are. They hold back constantly, instinctively, without knowing they are doing it. And that, more than anything else about them, is what convinces me that they belong here. He picked up his data pad and stepped down from the platform. The chamber remained silent for a long time. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. 11 species voted for restrictions, but 31 voted against. The humans would stay. That evening, Kethvarin found Majuro in the station's observation deck. She was sitting in a chair by the viewport, looking out at the stars, holding a cup of something hot in both hands. She smiled when she saw him. "Hey, Keth, I heard you said some nice things about us in the council today." "I said accurate things," he replied, sitting in the chair beside her. The chairs were built for multiple species, and his folded frame fit easily beside her compact one. "Well, whatever you said, thank you." She took a sip of her drink. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She looked at him with those strange, soft human eyes that hid 96th percentile bone density, and the endurance of a pursuit predator behind a layer of warmth that seemed entirely genuine because it was. "Do you really think we're that strong? I mean, I work out sometimes, but I'm pretty average." Kethvarin looked at her for a long time. He thought about 90 kilograms in one hand. He thought about 3,100 newtons and bleeding palms. He thought about a wall with a human-shaped hole in it and a medic with a burned shoulder who never stopped moving. He thought about a species that could chase an animal to death across open ground and considered it a fun fact. A people whose bodies could perform feats that the rest of the galaxy classified as impossible and who described themselves, without a trace of irony, as nothing special. Then he did something that surprised them both. He laughed. It was not a silly sound. His people did not laugh. They had a gesture for amusement, a soft flickering of their bioluminescence, but nothing like the full, helpless, slightly breathless sound that came out of him now. He had spent too long around humans. Their habits were contagious. Majuro stared at him, eyes wide, and then she started laughing too. And for a moment the two of them sat in the observation deck, alien and human, laughing at something neither of them could fully explain. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Kethvarin opened his data pad and began what he knew would be his final entry on the subject. He wrote slowly, taking his time, making sure the words were right. "I have studied 42 species across this galaxy. I have cataloged predators and prey, conquerors and survivors, civilizations built on strength and civilizations built on the fear of it. But in all my years of study, I have never encountered anything quite so terrifying or so remarkable as a species that could crush you without thinking and never once considers that it might." He paused, looked at the words, and added one more line. "The humans do not know their own strength, and I believe that is the very thing that makes them worthy of trust." He saved the file and closed the pad. Through the wall, faintly, he could hear the humans in the next section laughing about something. The sound was warm and careless and traveled farther than they knew. Kethvarin listened to it for a while. Then he closed his eyes and, for the first time in 4 months, slept well.